I never thought it would end like that. Not after everything I had given to that hospital, the late nights, the double shifts, the weekends I spent away from my family. For almost 7 years, that place had been my second home. I knew the halls like the back of my hand. I knew the nurses' favorite vending machine snacks, the doctor's coffee orders, the way the janitors would whistle as they cleaned the empty corridors after midnight. It wasn't just a job to me, it was my life. But all it took was one decision to tear it all apart. It started with a meeting, one of those corporate ones you could tell was bad news the moment you stepped into the room. The walls were too clean, the coffee too bitter, the smiles too forced. I sat at the far end of the long polished table, arms crossed over my chest, trying not to let the knot in my stomach show. Our new hospital administrator, Mr. Landon, was standing at the front, all sharp suits and slicked back hair, packing like a man with something big to sell. "We're upgrading our systems," he announced, clicking a button on the remote. A sleek PowerPoint appeared behind him, full of bullet points and flashy buzzwords: innovation, progress, future. At first it sounded exciting. New machines, faster software, AI-driven diagnostics that could supposedly catch what the human eye might miss. It was the kind of thing they promised would save lives, speed up treatments, make everything more efficient. But then he got to the part they had buried deep in the fine print. The new system wasn't properly certified yet. Some of the diagnostic tools hadn't passed all the federal safety trials. And worse, they wanted us to start using it anyway. I felt my heart drop. Landon brushed past the concerns like they were tiny speed bumps on the road to greatness. "We can't afford to wait," he said, smiling like he was handing us a gift. "We'll be the first in the region to implement it. Think about the publicity, think about the recognition." The room stayed silent, heavy with the kind of tension you could almost taste. Some people nodded along, others, like me, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I could feel it already, the unspoken pressure, the expectation to fall in line, to be a team player. But I couldn't. I couldn't sit back and pretend it was okay to gamble with people's lives just to beat the competition. I had seen too much. Patients who came in trusting us to do right by them, families who hung onto every word we said, desperate for hope. How could I look them in the eye if I knew we were using unproven tech on them without their consent? So I raised my hand. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. "Sir," I said, voice steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs, "are you saying we're expected to use these upgrades before they're fully cleared for use?" Landon's smile flickered just for a second. "This is a leadership opportunity," he said, like that explained everything. "Regulations are slow, medicine moves fast." I shook my head. Moving fast doesn't mean being reckless. I can't, in good conscience, sign off on this. The silence that followed was deafening. Every pair of eyes turned to me, wide and wary, like I had just stepped onto a battlefield they were too afraid to cross themselves. Landon's expression hardened. "Then perhaps you're not the right fit for the future we're building here." I don't remember what I said after that, maybe nothing, maybe some useless protest lost in the noise. I just remember the look in his eyes, the cold finality of it. By the end of the week I was gone. No warning, no severance, just an escort out of the building like I was some kind of threat. Like I was the danger. I stood outside the hospital that afternoon, my badge still burning in my pocket, the sun glaring down like it was mocking me. Everything I had worked for, gone. Just because I refused to stay silent. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought losing my job, my career, my identity, that was rock bottom. But the thing about hitting rock bottom is, sometimes you find out it's not a floor. It's a trapdoor. And mine was about to swing wide open. The first few days after they fired me were a blur. It's strange how you can go from being needed, relied on, part of the beating heart of a place, to absolutely nothing in the span of a single conversation. I kept waking up before sunrise like always, heart racing, thinking I was late for my shift. I'd swing my legs out of bed and start reaching for my scrubs before I remembered. I wasn't needed anymore. I wasn't even allowed through the doors. At first I told myself it would blow over, that someone, anyone, would speak up. That after all the years I spent covering for exhausted coworkers, stepping in on tough nights, volunteering for the worst shifts, someone would have my back. But the phone stayed silent. The text stopped. It was like I had vanished, erased from the story completely. I tried to distract myself. I updated my resume, though every time I stared at the blank reason for leaving box, my stomach turned. How do you explain something like that? Fired for refusing to compromise patient safety doesn't exactly roll off the tongue in a way that sounds hireable. And besides, part of me still wasn't ready to move on, not yet. Not when I knew what they were doing inside those walls. Not when I knew the people walking into that hospital had no idea they were being treated like guinea pigs. That knowledge sat in me like a rock I couldn't cough up. One night, about a week after I lost my job, I did something I hadn't done since high school. I parked across the street from the hospital and just watched. I sat there, hidden in the shadows of an old diner's parking lot, sipping lukewarm coffee, eyes locked on the glowing windows of the emergency room. People coming and going. Paramedics unloading stretchers. Families packing back and forth under the harsh fluorescent lights. Life went on inside those walls like I had never existed. I wondered how many of those patients were being run through that new, untested system right now. How many decisions were being made based on software that hadn't been proven safe. I wondered how many mistakes would be swept under the rug before someone finally said enough. It was almost midnight when I finally saw something. Something that made my blood run cold. A flurry of movement outside the ER entrance. Doctors and nurses rushing in and out, faces tight with panic. A young woman, couldn't have been more than 20, maybe 22, was wheeled in on a stretcher, pale, motionless, an oxygen mask strapped to her face. Her mother stumbled alongside, clutching her hand, shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. At first I thought maybe it was just a bad car crash, or an overdose. But then I noticed something else. One of the nurses, the older woman who used to sneak me extra coffee during long nights, was arguing with a man in a suit. Not a doctor. Not even hospital staff. One of the new tech reps Landon had brought in with the upgrades. I couldn't hear them, but I could see it. The way she pointed at a tablet in his hand. The way he kept shaking his head, gesturing for her to keep moving. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Something had gone wrong. Badly wrong. And instead of fixing it, they were covering it up. I sat there in my car, fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached, helpless to do anything but watch. Everything I had feared, the thing I had tried to stop, it was happening right in front of me. And there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Not yet. But I knew then, sitting there in the dark, that I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let them keep getting away with it. Even if it meant going up against them alone. I didn't have a job. I didn't have money. I didn't have backup. But I had the truth. And sometimes the truth is enough to burn everything down. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach so heavy it felt like I could barely breathe. I knew what I had seen. I knew that hospital was playing with people's lives like it was a game, brushing off every risk, every mistake, as long as it kept their shiny upgrades on schedule. But knowing and proving are two very different things. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I used to cram for medical exams, balancing a half-eaten piece of toast between shaking hands. My laptop sat open in front of me, a blank email flashing back at me, the cursor blinking like a ticking bomb. Who was I supposed to tell? And even if I did, would anyone listen? Hospitals are businesses. They protect their own. I wasn't naive about that anymore. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that girl from my mind, her pale face, her mother's desperate screams. If she had been hurt because of that system and I stayed silent, I'd be just as guilty. I started small. Anonymous tips to a few local reporters. Emails to regulatory boards. At first, nothing happened. No response, no interest. It was like screaming into a void. I almost gave up. Almost told myself that maybe it was better to just move on with my life, forget about it, let it be someone else's problem. And then 2 weeks later, everything changed. It started with a news story, small, buried near the bottom of the local paper's website. Family sues Memorial Hospital over alleged equipment malfunction. It wasn't much. No names mentioned. No details. But I knew. It had to be the same case. The young woman, the malfunction. Someone was finally asking questions. And if they were digging, if there was even a crack in the wall the hospital had built around itself, I could tear the whole damn thing down. I spent the next few days gathering everything I had. Old emails about the upgrade. Screenshots of staff concerns being brushed off. Copies of internal memos about the early rollout. Anything that could prove what they were hiding. I put it all into a single, massive folder on a flash drive. It wasn't easy. Part of me was terrified the hospital would somehow find out, that they'd come after me legally, that they'd smear my name harder than they already had. But the bigger part, the part that had watched too many innocent people walk through those doors, knew it was worth the risk. Finally, I contacted one of the reporters who had covered the lawsuit. A woman named Karen Mayers. Tough, smart, relentless. I still remember the first call with her. The way her voice sharpened the second I hinted at what I had. "You have proof?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my throat dry. "I used to work there, I know what they did." There was a long pause. "Then meet me tomorrow somewhere safe." It felt like stepping off a cliff. The next day, I met Karen at a rundown diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where nobody would notice two people talking in a booth. I handed her the flash drive across a sticky tabletop, half expecting her to laugh or tell me it wasn't enough. But she didn't. She listened. Took notes. Asked questions I didn't even realize needed asking. When we finished, she leaned back in her seat, eyes hard. "This," she said, tapping the flash drive, "could blow the whole thing wide open." For the first time in months, a tiny flicker of hope sparked in my chest. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe standing up had meant something after all. But Karen also warned me. If we run this story, they're going to come after you, hard. I knew that. I was ready for it. Or at least I thought I was. Because what happened after the story broke? It was worse than anything I had imagined. They weren't just going to fight back. They were going to destroy me. The story dropped on a Monday morning. I didn't even have to check my phone to know. The second I woke up, I could feel it, the kind of pressure in the air you get before a bad storm. When I finally did pick up my phone, it almost slipped from my hand. Dozens of notifications. Texts from old coworkers I hadn't heard from in months. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Even a few voicemails, sharp with panic and anger. I sat there in bed, staring at the screen, heart pounding. For a second, I thought about turning it all off, pretending none of it was real. But you can't outrun a wildfire once it's started. Karen's article didn't pull punches. She laid it all out: the rushed rollout of the upgrades, the ignored safety concerns, the patient harmed because of a system glitch. Anonymous sources, me, though she never used my name, confirmed everything. Within hours it was everywhere. Local news, social media, even the hospital's own employees were whispering behind closed doors. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like being hunted. The hospital hit back fast and viciously. Press releases calling the article misleading. Accusations that the anonymous former employee was disgruntled, unreliable, motivated by personal vendettas. They didn't name me directly. But they didn't have to. People put the pieces together. By noon, my name was floating around in online comment sections. Some defended me, calling me brave. Most didn't. Probably just some loser who couldn't hack it. Sounds like someone bitter about getting fired. He just wants attention. Each comment hit harder than the last. Like little cuts I couldn't bandage fast enough. It wasn't just strangers either. Friends I thought I could count on started distancing themselves. Some didn't respond to my texts at all. Others sent half-hearted messages: "I'm sure you meant well, but maybe you should have handled it differently." Maybe. But they weren't the ones who sat helpless while people were hurt. They weren't the ones who had to live with it. The worst blow came later that afternoon. A letter shoved under my apartment door, thick, official-looking. Legal threats. The hospital was accusing me of defamation, breach of confidentiality, malicious intent to harm the institution's reputation. It didn't matter that everything I said was true. In their world, power mattered more than truth. I sat on the floor, letter crumpled in my shaking hands, wondering how it had come to this. How doing the right thing could cost so much. I wanted to fight. God, I wanted to fight. But how do you fight a machine built to crush people like me? People without money, without connections, without a voice loud enough to drown out their lies. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every knock at a neighbor's door made my heart race. Paranoia settled in like a sickness. I started seeing their eyes everywhere, hospital executives in suits, lurking in coffee shops making calls. Was it my imagination? Maybe. Maybe not. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. Maybe no one. And yet, even as the fear twisted inside me, there was something else too. A stubborn, flickering anger. They wanted me to be scared. They wanted me to fold, to apologize, to disappear quietly so they could bury the story and move on. But if I caved now, what would that make me? They gambled with people's lives. They lied to the people who trusted them. They hurt someone's daughter, and they'd do it again if nobody stopped them. I couldn't undo what had already happened. I couldn't make people see me the way they used to. But maybe, just maybe, I could still make them see the truth. Even if it cost me everything. Especially if it cost me everything. The next morning, I didn't wait for the fear to sink its claws in again. I forced myself up before sunrise, got dressed in the half-darkness, and drove straight to Corinne's office. It wasn't anything fancy, a converted storage room inside a rundown newspaper building that smelled faintly of old ink and desperation. But to me, it felt like the last place on earth where the truth still had a fighting chance. Corinne was already there when I arrived, her sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot but sharp. She waved me in without a word and closed the door behind us. "They're coming after you hard," she said, pushing a copy of the hospital's press statement across the desk. I skimmed it quickly. The same garbage I had seen online, words like malicious, false, baseless accusations. My name wasn't printed, but it didn't need to be. Anyone who wanted to know could connect the dots. "They're trying to bury the story," I said, sinking into the cracked leather chair. Corinne nodded. "And you?" There was a long silence between us, heavy and loaded. "What do I do?" I finally asked, the question tasting like defeat on my tongue. Corinne leaned back in her chair, studying me for a long moment. "You fight," she said simply. She laid it out for me, the steps I could take. Going public officially. Doing interviews. Showing my face and telling my story instead of hiding behind anonymity. It was risky. Once I stepped out of the shadows, there'd be no going back. They'd attack harder. They might even try to ruin me professionally, make sure I never worked in a hospital again. But it would also make it harder for them to dismiss me as some angry, invisible nobody. They wanted to paint me as a coward. A liar. Standing up publicly would rip that weapon out of their hands. I didn't give Corinne an answer right away. I told her I needed to think. But deep down I already knew. Later that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table again, the same table where all of this had started. I stared at a blank notepad, the pen heavy in my hand. What would I even say if I went public? How could I explain why I had destroyed my career, burned every bridge, lost friends, lost almost everything, all because I couldn't stay quiet? Would anyone even believe me? I thought about that girl in the hospital. The way her mother had looked, pure panic and trust twisted together, clinging to the idea that the people in those scrubs would save her daughter. We had betrayed that trust. They had betrayed it. And I had a choice. Let them get away with it. Or stand up and face the fire. I picked up the pen and started writing. Not fancy. Not polished. Just the truth. My story. I wrote about the meeting where they first introduced the upgrades. I wrote about how they pressured us to use unapproved tech. I wrote about how concerns were silenced, brushed off. I wrote about that night in the parking lot, watching helplessly as it all unfolded. And I wrote about the fear they counted on to keep people like me quiet. By the time I finished, the sun was starting to rise again. A new day. A new battle. I called Corinne the second her office opened. "I'll do it," I said, my voice shook but I didn't care. "I'll tell my story on the record." There was a long pause. Then in her rough, no-nonsense voice, Corinne said, "Good, let's blow the lid off this thing." In the days that followed, everything moved fast. Interviews. Photographs. Endless questions from reporters who wanted to know why I had spoken up when nobody else had. I told the truth, every word of it. No spin. No excuses. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt free. But freedom has a cost. And mine was coming faster than I could have ever expected. The interviews aired on a Thursday night. I didn't even watch them at first. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the dark living room, lights off, staring at the muted TV screen like it might explode at any second. When my phone started buzzing nonstop, I knew the story had landed. Karen had done it right. No sensationalism. No clickbait. Just the raw facts, my testimony, the documents I had saved, the timeline of events that led up to that girl's injury. It was all out there now. No more shadows. No more hiding. The first few messages were supportive, friends I hadn't heard from in months telling me they were proud, people saying I had done the right thing. For a brief, flickering moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, this was going to turn out okay. Then the real storm hit. Threads. Emails. Messages. Even voicemails. Some anonymous, some not. Accusing me of lying. Accusing me of trying to destroy the hospital for fame or money or some selfish grudge. One voicemail left in the middle of the night simply said, "You're going to regret this." My hands shook as I deleted it. I had expected backlash. Karen had warned me. But knowing it was coming and living through it were two different things. It wasn't just strangers either. People I had once called friends, nurses, techs, even a few doctors turned on me. "You're ruining lives," one of them texted. "You're tearing down everything we built." I wanted to scream back at them. I'm not the one who started this. I'm not the one who gambled with people's lives. But I didn't respond. There was no point. Some people don't want the truth. They just want to stay comfortable. Things got worse after that. The hospital filed an official lawsuit against me, claiming breach of contract, violation of confidentiality agreements, and defamation with malicious intent. I knew it was a scare tactic. A way to intimidate me into silence. But lawsuits cost money. And I didn't have any. Karen put me in touch with a lawyer who agreed to take my case pro bono, a sharp, tired-looking man named Mr. Hammond who looked like he hadn't had a full night's sleep since the 90s. He didn't sugarcoat it. "They want to bleed you dry," he said, flipping through the thick stack of papers the hospital's lawyers had dumped on us. "They'll stretch this out as long as possible, hoping you'll break." "Can they win?" I asked, voice small. Hammond shrugged. "In court, unlikely. You've got documentation, witnesses, a good reporter backing you up, but they don't have to win, they just have to make it hurt." And God, did it hurt. The stress ate at me. Some days I barely ate. Barely slept. I'd sit by the window at night, watching the empty streets, half expecting someone to come pounding on my door. My apartment felt smaller and smaller, the walls creeping in, the air growing heavier. I lost weight. I lost friends. I lost whatever thin layer of normal life I had been clinging to. But even at my lowest, even in the moments when I thought about giving up, about calling Karen and telling her to pull the plug, I couldn't. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that girl again. Her pale face. Her mother's helpless screams. That was who I was fighting for. Not for myself. Not even really for justice. For the people who walked into those hospital doors trusting us, trusting me, to do right by them. I couldn't betray them now. Not after everything. Not ever. And then, right when I thought I couldn't take another punch, a crack appeared in the hospital's armor. Another whistleblower came forward. A quiet, terrified email to Karen, signed only with a single letter. Someone still inside the hospital. Someone who had seen even worse things happening since the upgrades were installed. Suddenly, it wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. It was two. And cracks, if you press hard enough, eventually shatter wide open. I didn't know it yet. But the tide was finally starting to turn. The second whistleblower changed everything. Once their story broke, the hospital couldn't keep pretending. It wasn't just me anymore, the so-called disgruntled former employee. Now there were two voices, two sets of evidence, two people standing shoulder to shoulder against the machine. And when you multiply the truth, it gets a lot harder to bury. News outlets started picking up the story nationally. Not just small local papers anymore, but big names, outlets that people actually listen to. Suddenly, the hospital wasn't just fighting me, they were fighting the weight of public opinion, and for once, they were losing. Investigators got involved. Real ones, not the internal cover-up committees Landon had relied on. Regulatory agencies announced formal reviews. Families of other patients came forward, sharing quiet, heartbreaking stories of mistakes and unexpected complications that never made sense until now. The walls started to crumble fast after that. The hospital tried to clean house, firing a few executives, suspending the tech reps who pushed the upgrade. They issued a carefully worded apology, full of legal jargon that said a lot without actually admitting anything. But it wasn't enough. Not this time. The lawsuits piled up. The bad press didn't go away. Donors pulled their money. Partnerships collapsed. Within months, the hospital's shining reputation was tarnished beyond repair. And Landon, the man who had started it all, quietly resigned, vanishing into some cushy consulting job halfway across the country where, no doubt, he'd start the cycle all over again. It wasn't the kind of justice you see in movies. There were no dramatic arrests, no public confessions under bright lights. But it was enough. Enough to stop them. Enough to make it matter. As for me, it wasn't like the movies either. There was no happy ending waiting with open arms. The hospital dropped their lawsuit eventually, after it became clear they had no leg to stand on. But by then the damage was done. I was blacklisted from most hospitals in the region, unofficially of course. Every interview ended the same way, polite smiles, empty promises, doors quietly closing behind me. Too high risk to hire. Too much baggage. I had lost the career I had built my whole life around. But I hadn't lost myself. And somewhere along the way, I realized that mattered more. I took a job teaching part-time at a community health program, training the next generation of nurses and techs. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much. But it was honest. It was real. And it gave me a chance to tell my story, not to scare them but to prepare them. To remind them that sometimes, doing the right thing means standing alone. That sometimes you lose everything and still win. Sometimes survival is the victory. Some nights when the world goes quiet, I still think about that girl. I wonder how she's doing. If she recovered. If her family ever found peace. I hope she's out there living her life, free and full and beautiful. And I hope, though she'll never know, that in some small way, she helped me find my life again too. There are scars, sure. Invisible ones etched deep. But they don't own me. Not anymore. I carry them like battle marks, reminders that I fought, even when it would have been easier to quit. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between what's right and what's easy is someone willing to get burned. And if I had to do it all again, I would. Every single time. I stood by the river one evening, the same river that ran behind the hospital, the same one I used to drive past on my way to early shifts, and I watched the city lights ripple across the dark water. The hospital still stood, a hollow, wounded giant on the hill. But it wasn't invincible anymore. And neither was I. I was something better. I was free. I took a deep breath, let the cold night air fill my lungs, and turned away from the past. There was a whole life waiting ahead of me. And this time, I was the one writing the story.